I'm Catherine Herridge, and this is Straight to the Point, our new weekly show. We're partnering with the LA Times Media Group to deliver more investigations and newsmaker interviews that demand accountability. It's a first of its kind collaboration. I have complete editorial control, and I remain an independent journalist. This week, we take you inside the Justice Department for an exclusive interview. I met with Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dhillon, head of the Civil Rights Division. Dhillon had significant updates on multiple investigations, including the stabbing death of a Ukrainian refugee in Charlotte, North Carolina, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the FBI records codenamed Arctic Frost, and much more. Harmeet Dhillon, thank you for speaking with Straight to the Point. When you came to the Justice Department 6 months ago to lead the Civil Rights Division, what did you find?
Well, it's an interesting question because when I was nominated by the president for this position, I got a lot of advice from people about all of the challenges I was going to face with the career staff here and the daunting amount of momentum that has gone on here in this building. And so, I just took it like every challenge. I came in the first week in the DOJ is like any new job. You do your training, your HR stuff, you fill out your paperwork. And then I was really eager to get down to business. So in the second week of my job, what I decided to do is, and there's like 11 or 12 different sections that we handle here, is write a memo for each of those sections, really making clear to all the attorneys and the other professionals what their priorities were going to be. So the Civil Rights Division is one of the largest, if not the largest section in the DOJ. And, each of the functions that we do is prescribed by statute. And then there's policies that are underlying them. So, for example, education and housing and disability and, others. And so I started with the statute or the Constitution. Sometimes that's relevant. And then I looked at the president's executive orders. By the time I came in, it was early April. Mm-hmm. And the president had issued a number of executive orders that were relevant to our work. For example, concerning DEI, concerning boys and girls sports, concerning a number of other issues. And so I made it clear to the lawyers in the DOJ that they were going to be taking their priorities and their cues from the president's priorities. And so each of them in the different sections got a memo. I did not anticipate that simply redefining people's priorities, but within the bounds of the statutory norms, was going to cause the level of chaos that it did. But literally over 200 attorneys decided to quit, and almost at that point, about half the staff of the Civil Rights Division as a result of those memos.
I was going to ask you, the reporting is that at least 368 personnel have left the Civil Rights Division. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Some of them took more than a few days to decide that, but over the course of the last few months, we've had a mass exodus of the career staff here in the Civil Rights Division. In fact, they have their own support groups. They made their own little ceremonies when they left the building. There was like a lot of hype and hoopla around it. And it's kind of interesting because I've been a lawyer in private practice and a lot of public interest litigation over the last 3+ decades of my life. But you occasionally come across these government lawyers, and particularly with the DOJ. And I was a summer associate here as a second-year lawyer.
So you've got some experience in the
Yes.
building.
So I started out 1992 when I was in law school. I worked in the constitutional tort section of the Civil Division down on the first floor. And that's what's called the Bivens section. So I was really proud as a young law student actually, to be working on such lofty issues of the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and so forth. But people took themselves very seriously. And they took themselves very seriously at the Civil Rights Division. And what's interesting is they viewed their job as doing everything from a particular perspective. And my perspective was different. My perspective was, we are here to serve all Americans, not just some Americans or the Americans who are winning the diversity sweepstakes, all Americans. That was a radical change of worldview here at the Civil Rights Division.
Well, the California Senator Adam Schiff accused you of canceling the Civil Rights Division. Mm-hmm. Have you canceled the Civil Rights Division?
I think the objective perspective here is that I have actually done more affirmative civil rights litigation than any other Republican administration in a 4-year period in the 7 months or so that I've been here on the job. And I'm really proud of that. I am a civil rights lawyer. I have been for decades. I've won important cases concerning police brutality and qualified immunity and the First Amendment, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. I'm really proud of that. I've been an activist against sometimes what the prevailing, counterculture would be on the right. And so for Adam Schiff to say that he was barely a lawyer for a decade or something a long time ago is really kind of funny.
For Tuesday's elections, the Justice Department sent election monitors to New Jersey and California. Is there any reporting from these teams of potential civil rights violations?
We are compiling our reports. I will say I got several reports on the day of on the ground, and there were some concerning aspects, I would say, particularly in New Jersey, but also in a state where we didn't send monitors because they weren't requested, in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, Chester County had 75,000 voters who were independent. They simply weren't included on the poll book. And that means that, some of them were turned away from the polls. I quickly put out a post on X informing the public that if you are subject to some irregularity at the polls, and because I'm a longtime election lawyer, I knew this without having to look it up, you can ask to vote provisionally. But a lot of people didn't know that,
People don't have that kind of information.
No, they didn't. And it's a real failure to imagine disenfranchising virtually 75,000 people in an election. And there were, 3 Supreme Court judge races on the election, very important races. That's the margin. I mean, 1 vote is the margin in an election. So that's a massive fail. So I think people can expect that there will be follow-up action from the DOJ on the failure to administer elections properly in multiple jurisdictions.
After Zohran Mamdani became New York City's mayor-elect, a Jewish day school in Brooklyn was defaced by a swastika. Your reaction?
Catherine, this is so disturbing. This has been one of the top priorities of this administration, is focusing on anti-Semitism around the country. And after October 7th, 2023, we have seen so many instances of violent attacks on synagogues, houses of worship, schools, and other Jewish institutions. We've also seen hostility to people of faith and houses of worship across the board, including numerous Christians as well. And so we have multiple investigations open regarding these types of issues. But what I will say about this is that I understand that Mr. Mamdani, the mayor-elect, is professing, concern about this and that there'll be no tolerance for this. His rhetoric throughout the campaign was extremely inflammatory and concerning to the Jewish community. And when that inflammatory rhetoric, including but not limited to last week of election phone banking, inviting foreign leaders like Jeremy Corbyn, who was disciplined by the Labor Party for anti-Semitism, who called Hamas and Hezbollah his friends. When somebody like that becomes the mayor, I think it emboldens haters to attack Jews. We have seen this pattern time and time again in modern history. This DOJ has zero tolerance, period, for any type of anti-Semitism or anti-religious bias against any faith. And we are doing that in multiple hate crime prosecutions, religious land use prosecutions, and FACE Act prosecution. We brought the first FACE Act prosecution against somebody attacking a house of worship. It was a Jewish house of worship in New Jersey. And so New York should brace. They should brace because there will be incoming hatred, but they should brace for a countervailing response from the Department of Justice.
Will the Civil Rights Division investigate the swastika incident at the Brooklyn school?
I've already opened an investigation into that.
What can you tell us about that preliminary investigation?
Well, the way we start these types of investigations, often there are no suspects because the people who do these things are cowards. They do it in the dead of night. But we have begun reaching out to law enforcement. Typically, that means reaching out to the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the FBI, asking the FBI to coordinate with local law enforcement to gather whatever evidence they may be. If there are suspects, we asked for the FBI to be part of those interviews, and we developed the facts. So I think as of this time, I'm not aware of suspects in that case, but we will be digging in to see what we can find.
And what would the potential charges be in the case?
Well, there are hate crimes charges that could be brought to bear in those types of situations. And depending on whether there's a house of worship involved or it's adjacent to a house of worship, it could be a violation of the FACE Act. So these are traditional types of charges that the DOJ brings, no matter who's the president.
On your personal X account, you commented on an undated video of Zohran Mamdani, where he says violence is an artificial construction. You wrote, said like someone who has never experienced it. Elaborate.
Well, look, anyone who's been a victim of violence, I've been a victim of violence in my life, and to say that that is something in my mind is gaslighting. It is outrageous. We can all see with our own two eyes that violence is occurring in our country. As you know, Catherine, I'm a former journalist, and I'm a lawyer for many journalists in my private life before I became the Assistant Attorney General. Journalists in our country have been subjected to violence. Famously, one of my clients is Andy No, in my private practice, who was subjected to mob violence by Antifa. To say that that's some kind of a fictional construct is an outrageous denial of reality. Journalist Nick Sorter, just this year, while I was the Assistant Attorney General, was subjected to violence in Portland, Oregon. And I think historically we've seen this type of violence against journalists, against activists, against, even on the left, call it trade union activists or what have you. It's a tool of repression, and it's real. And denying it means you're denying reality, and I find that very disturbing.
I want to pick up on a point you made earlier. The former head of Great Britain's Labor Party, Jeremy Corbyn, participated in a phone banking session to support then-candidate Mamdani. Did Corbyn and Mamdani cross the line into foreign election interference?
Well, I did tweet about that. I raised the question as to whether that was the case. Under Federal Election Commission guidance and rules, it really rests on whether his participation was purely voluntary or not, and what resources were expended and who paid for them. And so I don't think we have enough facts to reach a conclusion on that, but my understanding from a British journalist is that the phone banking took place in the UK. Mm-hmm. So those are international phone calls. If that's the case, who paid for the phones, who paid for the phone calls? Now, I don't know all the facts. Again,
Have you opened an investigation?
I have not opened an investigation into that. That would be something for the Federal Election Commission. However, I have reached out to FEC staff about that. That would be for them to look at. And if it turns out that there was an impact on the election and there was some irregularity from the election perspective that violates our federal civil rights laws, then there might be something for us to look at there. But, it is frequently the case that violations or issues come to our attention, and we have a whole of government, very coordinated approach in this administration. So I am constantly issue spotting and triaging things and sending them to other aspects of the government.
You recently sent a letter to the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections. Why is the Civil Rights Division seeking records from the 2020 election in Georgia?
Well, there may be irregularities in that case, and our job is not just to look at what happened in the past, but more importantly, to make sure future elections are safe and secure, and for me as a citizen, that all citizens accept the outcome of them. I think that's really important. That's a hallmark of a functioning government and a functioning society, and we don't have that right now. I think fully half the country questions the outcome of the 2020 election. And I would rather not see that to be the case.
Is it really half the country?
I think it's a lot of people.
Are you going to get 2020 election records from other jurisdictions?
So here's the distinction. Now, the statute that we used to request these records is the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which provides that the Attorney General has the right to request records that exist. Now, the statutory time period to keep those records is a certain time period, which is shorter than the time between now and the last election. However, in Fulton County, Georgia, there was litigation. So those records still exist because when there's litigation pending, they're required to preserve them. Yeah. So if there are other jurisdictions where I believe, or there is evidence that there were irregularities, and I will tell you that, in my opinion, there were significant irregularities in the conduct of the election of 2020 in Wisconsin. I can give you the examples. In Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, in Georgia, some of the swing states, there were numerous irregularities, and they varied by county, they varied by area. There may be records still, and in some places there are not going to be records. So we rely on the public and whistleblowers to tell us, hey, there is an issue there, the records are still there. Sometimes you can do something about violations, and sometimes you can't. So in this case, I would like to review those records because I believe there were irregularities. There may have been irregularities. And then we look at the evidence. When we get them, we'll look at them. And there either will be or there won't be. And so then we go from there. That's kind of it's a funnel approach.
Did President Trump ask you to get these 2020 election records?
No, President Trump did not ask me to do that. But I did notice from my online review and from my understanding of the facts that, election officials in that state asked for those records, and they've been stonewalled. So many people want to see these records.
The criticism is that this is ancient history and that this is the type of behavior that you see with election deniers. Are you an election denier?
Of course not. I am an election lawyer before I came to the DOJ. And statutes of limitations can be first of all, some crimes have no statute of limitations. Some torts have long statutes of limitations. So 5 years ago is not ancient history. In fact, many people's lives were ruined over false allegations regarding the 2020 election. President Trump was dragged through the mud over false allegations, Russia collusion allegations, and so forth regarding 2016. I have personally represented people who were wronged 10 and 20 years ago. No, justice is not a 4 or 5 year statute. It is doing what you can to right wrongs within the memory and the statute.
California passed Prop 50, which is the Democrats' redistricting measure. Will the Civil Rights Division challenge Prop 50?
So we will have to take a look at the challenges that are out there. Let me explain that the different ways we get involved in different disputes can include filing our own lawsuit. That's sort of the apex. Beyond that, we can intervene in a private lawsuit or a lawsuit that another government files. Beyond that is something called a statement of interest in a lawsuit. It's kind of like a trial level amicus. Now, in this particular case, I will say that the law firm I used to own represents several legislators who filed a challenge yesterday in court. Because it is a law firm that I used to be part of, I would be recused from getting involved in that lawsuit. So I have had no discussions with my staff about that lawsuit because of the conflict of interest, and so I'm recused from that particular case. But there may be other original cases that we could bring to bear. So we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to see, it is so fresh. I suspect evidence is going to come out regarding the allegation I understand from the press is that there's a racial aspect of the line drawing. Now, I signed a brief in the United States Supreme Court in the case of Louisiana versus Calais. That is the big Voting Rights Act redistricting case, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, that our colleague John Sauer argued at the United States Supreme Court less than a month ago. I was privileged to go there with my principal deputy, and we witnessed that argument of the brief that we helped author. And the United States Supreme Court could rule on that landmark case in the next couple of months. And if they do, that would certainly have some impact on the line drawing that has occurred just now in California, as well as some other jurisdictions. I mean, it could be that many racially drawn lines will be subject to court challenge and possibly in time for the 2026 election. Again, all depending on when the court issues its definitive pronouncement, if it does, in that Voting Rights Act case.
Are you the main point of contact or the lead here at the Justice Department on these redistricting cases?
I think that's fair to say. I think there are other people here who are interested in it, but we have jurisdiction to enforce the federal voting rights laws, including Voting Rights Act, Help America Vote Act, National Voter Registration Act, and a law called UOCAVA that covers military and overseas voters.
Is it fair to assess that the 2026 midterm map and the prospects for a number of Republican candidates will really hinge on the efforts of you and your office?
This is a nonpartisan office, so Republican or Democrat is not my job to make those calls, balls and strikes. I resigned from the Republican National Committee and all political activity, in fact. But I think the bigger picture question is, and this was addressed in the Louisiana versus Calais argument, is that the default analysis of racial gerrymandering has been that it benefits one party over the other. And that is shown to be a false premise today because you have several minorities elected to Congress in different jurisdictions, Texas, for example, who aren't Democrat. The understanding was we're going to draw these Democrat districts and African Americans and Latinos are going to fill them. Today, people of both parties are being elected as minorities in our country. There's senators of red states who are African American, and they're a minority in that state. So these racial assumptions are no longer true, which is actually one of the beautiful things about our country. So, but the race part is a violation of equal protection, in my opinion, and that's the argument we made to the Supreme Court. There may have been a time in our country, there was a time in our country when the effects of racism and the vestiges of slavery lasted well into my lifetime and yours. And now we are well beyond that, in my opinion.
The U.S. government shutdown is now the longest in U.S. history. Has the shutdown impacted the work of the Civil Rights Division?
It has impacted the entire Department of Justice. Majority of the work that we do here is so-called non-exempt under the Anti-Deficiency Act. And so I would say several times a day, my team is calling our Office of Legal Counsel here to get an opinion on whether something that we'd like to do is exempted or not. And we follow that advice. But for example, anything having to do with a hate crime like the swastika or the FACE Act, anything where we have a court deadline and the court hasn't given us an extension, we filed for extensions in all of our cases. If it doesn't have to do with some of these exempted areas, then we can't do anything about it. And so I actually have, I mentioned earlier in our interview how active we have been. Unlike most, I think, civil rights chiefs who sort of wait for people to bring them stuff, I'm on social media all waking hours of the day, issue spotting, identifying issues and bringing them in.
Is it a big
tool
tool for you?
Pile.
Is X a big tool for you to identify issues?
Potentially,
it is.
It is. I actually, unlike most Republican appointed civil rights chiefs, I was a plaintiff's lawyer in private practice. So I issue spotted for my career, like, oh, this bad thing is happening. What can I do about it? Who can do something about it? Let's have a call. So that's what I do today. And so we actually are still doing that. We're still doing the issue spotting. I'm exempt, and my top team is exempt. So we have a pile in each of those sections of the DOJ ready to go once the shutdown lifts.
Well, you're inside the administration. What's your guesstimate as to when the shutdown ends, and who takes the blame?
So there's two different questions. I think now, since we're 2 days after the election and it didn't magically lift yesterday, I think we're still in for a game of chicken. It may go through Thanksgiving. I think that's my best bet, is at least another couple of weeks. I think the president is probably going to ratchet up the pressure, if I had to guess. And it is really hurting a lot of American families. It's hurting families as a DOJ. I have friends who are United States attorneys, and there are lawyers and staff who need food assistance to make ends meet. And the average American doesn't have savings to carry them through this. So I think it's a real human tragedy that, the elected leaders are not able to reach an agreement here. But in terms of who takes the blame, I think it depends on your political perspective. I think certainly the perspective of the people who vote or support Republicans is that the idea that Democrats are shutting down the government because they want to make sure that people who came into our country illegally get health care is outrageous. And, that there's an equally rigid worldview on the other side of that. And there are people who think that how dare Republicans be so heartless to not simply accept that this as the price of doing business. And ultimately, my personal opinion is that some of these ancient practices legislatively in the Senate and the House, their courtesies, their filibuster bill, their filibuster rules, and even their blue slip process need to be reevaluated in light of the modern lack of collegiality between the parties. And in the ancient times, senators and congressmen used to be on opposite sides of a vote and get together and have a dinner and have a meal and treat each other like human beings. That civility went out the window, I think, during the Obama era. And I think the rules need to be updated to reflect that. And we might not be in a shutdown if we had modern rules.
I want to move on to North Carolina. On August 22nd, a Ukrainian refugee, Iryna Zarutska, was stabbed to death on mass transit. Is the Civil Rights Division investigating Iryna Zarutska's murder?
The United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division works hand in hand with the U.S. Attorney's offices around the country. There are 94 of them. And so the day that happened, the next day, I think I did speak to the U.S. Attorney. U.S. Attorney is working with us on that. We are gathering evidence. We are in touch with the FBI about the interview of the suspect in that case. He's entitled to his presumption of innocence, of course, but we are investigating it as a potential hate crime due to the remarks made by the defendant.
I was just going to ask you, in the security video, it's alleged that the defendant, Carlos Brown Jr., can be heard muttering, "I got that white girl." Have your investigators been able to confirm that he made that statement?
I can't comment on the evidence that we've uncovered, but I will say that any incident involving apparent racial animus is investigated by the DOJ as a potential hate crime.
Is that statement enough to bring hate crime charges?
You know, it depends on the totality of the evidence, what other evidence there might be in the different direction. So what other statements did this person make? You know, you have to really look at that. And one important point I think people need to understand is that this is a beef I've always had as a lawyer in private practice with the DOJ before I came here, is that there seems to, in some administrations, have been this zeal to just simply get prosecutions and get convictions. That's not our approach here at the Civil Rights Division in my administration and Pam Bondi's administration. You learn in law school that the ethical norm of a prosecutor is actually not to get prosecutions or convictions, but to do justice. And that's what I see here. And so we're going to go where the facts lead us. And if the facts don't support the conclusion that beyond a reasonable doubt, this crime was motivated by hatred for this woman because she was white or another protected characteristic or a woman or what have you, or her national origin, we're not going to go there. So we have to just really gather the evidence and see.
Your Justice Department website defines a hate crime as a crime motivated by bias. Was Charlie Kirk's assassination a hate crime?
Again, I would have the same answer. There are indications that it may have been a hate crime. There is a Christian aspect to this. There's a transgender aspect to this. The fact that young people, and even not young people, have such a volume of evidence on their phones and their social media communications means that doing a comprehensive review of all the people involved, maybe beyond the actual suspect that's been charged in Utah in this case, means that there may be other evidence.
Are you investigating Charlie Kirk's assassination as a potential hate crime?
The DOJ is investigating it as a potential hate crime, yes.
Okay. Any timeline you'd want to offer on when you can reach an assessment?
I cannot do that. I think it could be months, it could be weeks, it could be sooner. But eventually, you have to leave the door open because evidence could always come up within the statute of limitations. What I will say is that we're pleased with our law enforcement partners in Utah who have, I think, done a very thorough job. I'm in touch with the FBI over there. Prosecutors from my office have gone there and, sort of established those relationships. We're taking this matter very seriously. And, there have been, particularly, like I said, there have been numerous crimes in our country recently motivated by bias against people of faith, all faiths, including the Christian faith. And so it's a serious concern of this DOJ.
This is sort of a moment in the interview reflecting on what happened in Charlotte and what happened with Charlie Kirk, where it feels a little personal. Is that a fair assessment?
It's personal in the sense that faith is important to me in my career and in my personal life. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. During most of that time, I have represented people of faith in challenges to government behavior and challenges to hateful behavior and conduct, attacks, employment discrimination. It is a signature aspect of my particular career. But beyond that, I find it a signature aspect of the United States Constitution. It is literally the basis on which our country was founded, our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, that faith and independence of faith and people of faith and faith values should be protected as high values in our country. And they're under attack. So, I think it's deeply concerning. And all faiths. I mean, our Department of Justice has opened up religious land use and institutionalized persons investigations involving the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, Buddhist, Muslim. We have cases involving all religions here. And I've actually had outreach meetings in this conference room with representatives of many different faiths. And so I would say it's a very high priority of this administration.
I want to talk about tech censorship. This week, YouTube gave creators a deadline to reclaim accounts and followers that were shut down over content related to COVID-19 and elections. Given how many Americans were canceled and the coordination between the federal government and big tech, should there be legal consequences?
Well, I think there should be legal consequences. It's certainly a position that I took in private practice. I have represented many challengers to arbitrary and capricious content-based shutdown determinations. I am on some of those government lists of evidence that have come out years after the fact of people who were censored at the request of the government for my speech regarding COVID or regarding the election of 2020. I filed a lawsuit that went up to the Supreme Court, was denied at the Supreme Court level, involving censorship on X before Elon Musk acquired it, of conservative lawyer Rogan O'Hanley, who was censored by the California Secretary of State with the collusion of the National Association of Secretaries of State and a $25 million contract that California put out to censor American speech. To me, this is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. The wrong argument used by the court to shut down that case and many others like it was that the Communications Decency Act of 1996 somehow immunized platforms. But at the time that that law was passed, there were no social media. The internet was dial-up. I remember dialing up to the internet.
I remember that too.
Remember that wagon wheel and that sound? That's how old that law is. I have repeatedly testified in Congress and urged, before I took this job, of course, and urged Congress to update that law. Where you're simply a passive host or you're a Verizon or you're an internet provider, you're not responsible for the emails people send to each other. Where you're calling balls and strikes and saying who can speak on vaccine issues and on election issues, you absolutely cross the line and you defame people and you violate their contractual agreements. And I think that's really problematic. So I hope Congress does something about this.
Several whistleblowers have come forward to Congress with records from Arctic frost. This is an investigation that shows Special Counsel Jack Smith and his team had 197 subpoenas that sought testimony, records, and communications from at least 430 Republican individuals and entities. Are you investigating Arctic frost?
Well, we are in this shutdown mode. Those documents came out very recently. And being a lawyer, I have to put out my disclaimer. My old law firm is on that list of targets because we represented the Republican National Committee and the Trump campaign and President Trump. And so we were among those targets. And so anything having to do with that, of course, I'll be recused from. But it is something that we are looking at. And just to cite the relevant statutes, 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242 concern violations of civil rights and conspiracies against rights. Even though I'm a conservative, even when I was a law clerk, I remember being extremely concerned about Fourth Amendment violations. I believe it is very important that people's civil rights and the presumption of innocence be maintained, and unreasonable searches and seizures are a violation of the Constitution, and we take that very seriously. And so I think it is outrageous, and I think it is outrageous if any journalist is surveilled. I think it is outrageous when lawyers are surveilled because they have an attorney-client privilege that is recognized both in common law and in statute. Defendants have rights, and legislators have rights. Now, I'm a little less concerned about the legislators compared to all the other categories. They got power, which your average lawyer doesn't know until years later. Your average journalist doesn't know they're being surveilled, and your average criminal defendant doesn't know that their rights are being violated. Jack Smith's conduct, as I have seen so far, is deeply concerning to me. And there are professional and ethical norms that apply to lawyers and prosecutors. And I think some of those may have been transgressed here. So I cannot say exactly what we're looking at right now, but I'm deeply
But you are
concerned about
you're
it.
reviewing the Arctic frost
I
records to
am
see if there are
reviewing it.
any legal
We are reviewing
violations.
it. That is correct.
Okay. Women's sports, one of your major objectives has been getting transgender athletes out of women's sports. Where does that stand, and what's your next objective?
Well, I would say getting boys out of girls' sports is how I look at it. The work has included sending some letters to some states, just because, it's kind of funny that you asked the question, because a lot of people are very frustrated. They see something wrong on the internet and they're like, where are the arrests? How come you haven't arrested people? Nice tweet, where are the arrests? That's not how it works. You start, according to the Justice Manual, with an investigation. You send a letter, you ask for evidence. You hope somebody gives you the evidence. Oftentimes they don't. Then you ratchet it up. You draft your lawsuit, you file the lawsuit, you serve it. You might get the evidence. Then you look at the evidence civilly. And if it supports a criminal investigation, then you do that. So there's steps you have to go through due process. We believe in due process here. So we sent a letter to California. There's actually a framed copy of it in my office. The president liked my letter. And we asked California for the evidence regarding what are their policies with boys and girls sports. Well, California responded, Gavin Newsom, by suing me and suing the Attorney General for sending a letter. This is silly, and they have no standing to do that, and it's premature. So we're dealing with that lawsuit. Separately, we then waited. We didn't get what we needed. We filed a lawsuit in another court in California. That case is proceeding. So there are 2 lawsuits now in California regarding that, and there's some lawsuits in some other states, Maine, Minnesota, and others. And it's interesting how the feminist movement has come full circle. Literally, Title IX was passed. The impetus of it is, I think it protects boys and girls, but the impetus was that women were facing discrimination in employment, and in education rather, not just in sports, but in many other arenas. Sports is one of them. And so this was meant to equalize and give girls opportunities. And the ability of a young woman to be able to compete for scholarships, to win prizes, to be the best in her category is invaluable. It creates confidence. You know, girls lack confidence. Girls have these challenges. It is important. And suddenly boys are taking away these girls' trophies and these girls' opportunities and these girls' scholarships. And it's almost like it's setting women back 50 years. So it's kind of crazy, and that the, liberal edifice is defending that. So we intend to stick with the intent and the purpose of Title IX and stand up for those girls. And by the way, I think it's a very popular issue in our country, and you even see a lot of legislators who won't agree with me on a lot of issues agree that their daughters should have the same opportunity as their sons.
The Trump administration has been fairly successful getting some significant changes in financial settlements from major American universities, UPenn, Columbia, Brown, the University of Virginia. Are the negotiations losing momentum?
They're not. I view the reason to do some of these settlements, even during the shutdown, as public safety related. So like there's been some significant violent anti-Semitism on some of our American campuses. So even during this shutdown, most of that work is slowed, but I've had negotiations today with multiple institutions. And so they do continue, and we are reaching resolutions. In fact, by the time, people are seeing this interview, there may be an announcement about it.
Are you close to a settlement with UCLA?
UCLA has been slowed down significantly because they changed counsel. We were talking to a particular counsel. I've had some conversations there. Gavin Newsom heard about them and tried to interfere with them and bully members of the Board of Regents of the UC system. But I think there's a significant commitment from the regents to reach a resolution. But because they changed counsel early in this shutdown period, we've had to restart those negotiations, but they will be continuing.
Are you making progress with Harvard?
Yes. That's all I will say.
Are you getting close to a resolution with Harvard?
I think a number of points have moved quite far along, and I'm very hopeful. I personally have invested significant time in the Harvard discussions, as has Linda McMahon, our education secretary. It's a very small group of people involved in these negotiations, and the president talks to me regularly about these issues, so he's very invested in it as well.
Okay. I want to talk a couple of questions about media as we wrap out. But first, you're well aware of the criticism that you have faced. You've been accused of lacking civility, supporting the restriction of voting rights, and being an election denier. How do you respond to that criticism?
I don't feel like I need to respond to it. I think those are partisan attacks. And look, I've been a lawyer involved in very controversial cases for decades. And if you don't have, and I've been involved in politics, so I'll run for office. You got to have thick skin in these positions. So it doesn't bug me too much. I will say that when a governor like Gavin Newsom personally attacks me on the internet, leading to death threats, that's kind of irresponsible. It's unnecessary. It does concern me. And so that's happened repeatedly. Just yesterday, he attacked me by name. His office attacked me by name. And, that can lead to violence. And I've had to call the U.S. Marshals to my house to assess my security. I've had to change how I dress in public sometimes. I've been heckled at the DMV. You feel unsafe as a woman by yourself. And so I think it's not free to make those kinds of attacks. But we do have great security here. U.S. Marshals are available. I get escorted to court when I'm in a public hearing. And so we take measures. But ultimately, nothing is going to deter me from doing the job that President Trump honored me by asking me to do for the American people. It's the privilege of my life to do it. Everybody here is committed to it. And nobody is deterred by these shallow sham threats and criticisms.
Are the Trump administration's new restrictions on reporters at the Pentagon and at the White House, this impacts their ability to gather information for the public? Is this a civil rights matter?
No, it really isn't. And when you look at the First Amendment, there's a very carefully calibrated analysis and jurisprudence around what is a public space, what is a limited purpose public forum for speech, and what is a non-public space. Okay, so for example, journalists have access to the Pentagon and to this building. There's like 50 journalists credentialed here. They wander the halls, but it's not unlimited. And also in this building, even on this floor, are SCIFs, the secure facilities where highly confidential information is exchanged. You don't have a right to stick your ear or your cup on the door of the SCIF and hear what's happening inside. That's not a thing. And the reason for the recent restrictions has been very clearly articulated by the White House. Journalists were caught literally putting their ear to the door of Caroline Leavitt's office in the White House. I am a senior DOJ official. I cannot wander unescorted in the White House. So by definition, journalists are not better than me and should have better access than that. So I think journalists too, I'm a former journalist, so I respect your craft. They also must behave responsibly. And if they're going to be irresponsible, we've had some journalists participate and collude in James Comey's leaks of national security information. It is not, the First Amendment gives journalists a tremendous amount of protection, and I've gone to court repeatedly to fight for those rights for journalists. My clients were mostly journalists in the First Amendment space against government restrictions, but it's not unlimited.
You could have given this wide-ranging interview to any corporate media outlet. Why did you choose independent journalism?
First of all, I have a soft spot for it. I have represented many independent journalists, and today in 2025, that's where the real news and the real journalism is coming out. I'm an avid consumer of independent podcasts, and I like to listen to different viewpoints I don't necessarily agree with. And I think that I was interviewed by 60 Minutes when I was in college. And even back then, I was shocked with the biased nature of legacy journalism. That's 1988 or 1989. It hasn't gotten any better. And so I really appreciate the important light that independent journalists bring to the world around us. And I think they serve a critical role. And I think it is one of the most refreshing aspects of the Trump administration that they have credentialed alternate media to cover the White House and the press pool and throughout. It is just so refreshing for America.
Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dhillon, thank you for joining us on Straight to the Point.
Thanks for having me.
It takes a lot of preparation before we sit down in those chairs and start the interview. We don't have a big team, so we all wear different hats, but there's the coordination with the crews, the production, the clearances. And then as the reporter, I need to do my own research and formulate the questions. I want the questions to be clear, direct, and concise, because my experience is that when they're very direct, very concise, you have the best opportunity to move the news forward. And that's what I found in this case. As I was listening, doing the interview, I'm taking mental notes about the headlines. The first big one to me was about the New York elections. What she said was an investigation into the swastika that was found at a Jewish day school in Brooklyn as a potential hate crime. Also questions about foreign election interference involving the mayor-elect. She had headlines on the status, how it's moving forward with the investigation in North Carolina into the Ukrainian refugee who was murdered on mass transit, as well as the Charlie Kirk assassination. And to me, the biggest revelation was the Arctic frost records, that there is a review that's going on, and they're looking at potential violations of 2 criminal statutes. Next week is Veterans Day, and we have a special investigation. I've been looking at this since May, and it's the story of a warfighter that has spent 6 years and $70,000 of his own money just to have a service-related injury recognized by the Air Force. This is an investigation in the truest sense of the word, and it's all about accountability. So we'll see you next week on Straight to the Point.